more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
Well, today, Julia, we get to dive into a beer style that is not really easily found. I struggled to find this one, but I call it the Dortmunder, or the German Helles export. This one's a little bit tricky. Have you?
I would agree, especially because the style guidelines, when you study beer judge certification program style guidelines, have evolved the name of it, for example. And then some commercial breweries, unless they were really traditional, kind of have fallen on the side of going towards Helles instead of, the export. So yeah. It's funny, especially if you're not really in the country of origin, because in this case, it is harder to find commercial examples, and we'll talk about those, from U.S. craft brewers of this version of pale bitter European beer.
Yeah. And from some studies that I've done, and even looking at the BJCP guidelines, they do talk about how in the country it's just called the Dortmunder, and coming from the town of Dortmund. But let's talk about the style, because it's a shame that we can't find these more often, because I absolutely love them. It does come from the northern town. It does have more minerally character that we'll talk about. But all in all, if I had to pigeonhole this beer, it's basically the big sibling of a Munich Helles, is how I think of it, with a little extra gravel thrown into the boil kettle, for that minerally flavor.
Right, and I like that. And Munich Helles, the word Munich's very intentional. Munich Helles, meaning Munich beer originating in Munich that is pale, right? Originated in Munich in Germany, whereas German Helles export really originated in the region of Dortmunder, right? Yeah. It's a Dortmund export because of that city. That's where this style originated, not in Munich.
And export really speaks to, granted, export was they're going to sell it somewhere else and ship it somewhere else, but it also implies a strength, because you had to brew them stronger so they'd stand the test of time. And you can see export in other examples that really is a beer shipped elsewhere. But that also just keys into, it's going to be a little bit stronger than other similar beers. But it's funny when you look at the stats of this compared to Munich Helles, it's just slightly bigger in pretty much all respects than Munich Helles. So that's why I call this the big brother, the big sister of Munich Helles, which is also to say I love the heck out of this beer, which is why I wish we'd have more of them. But so let's dive into it, because it's a country apart, but so similar. You want to take us through the typical ingredients we'd expect to find in this beer?
Sure. And I will also kind of bring back around your statement of stronger, which can be relative. So to be specific, when you say stronger, it's a higher final gravity than a German or than a Helles, right? Then that is the case. So that's important. Also, it's generally more bitter. That's stronger. The bitterness is stronger because of the water profile in Dortmunder. Mm-hmm. So in Dortmund, in the Ruhr industrial region in Germany, you've got a higher essence of minerals in the water, higher chlorides, higher sulfites, higher carbonate. Those are going to accentuate the bitterness in the beer. So that's really important. So that's a characteristic ingredient. When people talk about German Helles export beer, they start talking about the water first. So if you're brewing this, you're going to want to mimic that water profile. And then it's the rest of it's like, write the book, it's easy, classic German stuff, right? Traditional German lager yeast, traditional German or, inspired Czech hops, Pilsner malt, German Pilsner malt, and then decoction mashing, which is a traditional German brewing technique where you pull off a portion up to a third almost in often cases of the actual boil, and concentrate it and boil it much longer and then blend it back in. And that often adds complexity. The other piece that the style guidelines doesn't touch upon, but it's certainly from my research on many classic examples that have gone more modern, newer versions can contain adjuncts like corn or rice. They just don't talk about it much. It's the white elephant in the room, or hop extracts, which frankly is not a dirty word. Hop extracts is a fine and viable version of adding hop bittering agents or aromatic or flavor compounds. But I just wanted to note those two differences in ingredients that the style guidelines don't touch upon, because they are commonly being used when people brew these versions of the beer.
So a quick overview in this before we really dive into the aroma and flavor and mouthfeel aspects of this is a beer that was really designed to compete. We talked about Pilsners fairly recently as far as this video is concerned. We've talked about Pilsners, and especially the Czech premium pale Pilsner, the original Pils, that there are a lot of beers that were designed to compete with the domination of this pale, refreshing liquid that was circulating Europe at the time. This is one of those beers where the brewers thought, hey, that's selling. The stuff that we've been brewing isn't. Let's brew something like that. And so you end up with the Dortmund, developed kind of like in the late 1800s. The overall profile I compare it to Munich Helles, and we'll get into comparisons later, but it's just bigger. It's a little bit fuller bodied, and there is, at least in this beer and others that I've had, there is that note of a minerally character that you can taste, as well as that mineral aspect that just kind of brings the hops into a little bit more assertive prominence than I would expect to find in a Munich Helles. To me, that's just how to stick this in a nutshell. This is just, I'll say it again, it's just a big Helles, and it's beautiful.
That's awesome. And again, we're talking about German Helles export beer, part of the pale bitter European beer category for Beer Judge Certification Program style guidelines from 2021. And are you okay, Jeremy, if we then dive into appearance, which I will take us through because it's pretty quick.
Please, I will dive in.
You're showing us.
I will dive into appearance while you talk about it.
Right. So medium yellow to deep gold. If anyone's come across commercial examples from the US, the classic one is Great Lakes Dortmunder Gold. There's a reason they use that word gold, because the color of the German Helles export beer is commonly gold or 5 SRM. It's known to be clear. Yours looks a little hazy. That never scares me. But the style guidelines call for clear. Clear does not mean brilliant, right? Clear means clear. I can see Jeremy's shirt, and maybe if you put it in front of your microphone cords, your hand, right? It's clear. Don't freak out, people. There's a haze, but that doesn't mean it's not clear. We know when something's hazy. That is not hazy. And then persistent white collar of foam is the classic. Look at Jeremy's glass. Oh my gosh, I can taste it through the screen here. And if you're listening to us verbally, go get yourself one and then you'll understand. But that persistent rocky white collar of foam, which frankly is not wheat influenced. A lot of beers that have persistent white heads are because of the wheat, which has higher protein content. In this instance, this is just really good brewing technique. And the glassware is certainly helping keep that collar of foam, stable for more than 60 seconds. And it's white. It's not tan. It's not brown. It's a very white collar of foam. And there is your appearance. What about your aroma or anything you want to add to appearance?
Well, and that's where, one of these days we really need to do these shows together. So if I have beer and you don't, then we can share. So I apologize for having beer when you don't. The aroma, this one really kicks it off well, but you should have a medium kind of sweet, grainy malt flavor. It can be bready, doughy. I get just a very, very slight kind of like cornish corn flavor to it, but it's not sulfury. It's not. It's just like a sweet corn, but it's not like a DMS type of thing, a dimethyl sulfide. It's just this wonderful grainy sweet, but there's no toastiness, there's no roasty, there's no caramel. You do get a noble hop kind of a character out of it. It's actually kind of a medium noble hop, which is We've talked about this before. It can be floral, it can be herbal. I think of it sometimes as almost like a kind of garden twigs. Sometimes black pepper, but this one has very much less black pepper. The thing I love about this is that this is a balanced malt versus the hops flavor, hop bitterness. It's a very balanced beer, and that's really what it should be. And that's I didn't talk about fermentation though, because this is a good German lager. There's a very clean fermentation profile. It's very well attenuated. Even though it has body, it's still attenuated. It's not chewy. But we'll talk about that when we get to mouthfeel. What about the flavor?
Again, these styles will emulate very much what's going on in the aroma to slip into the flavor, but the flavor brings a little more to the equation. It's a balance of malt and hops. Certainly the bitterness though comes in because you do not in sensory realm get or perceive bitterness from aroma. You would only perceive that from flavor and your essence of, tongue and soft palate. So that supporting bitterness that's more sharp is going to be a player to really preside. That medium dry finish then with the bitterness leaves it very refreshing. I'm going to say that that's a really refreshing beer style. The aftertaste, which is really not too aggressive, it will fade rather quickly, is both the malt and hops in balance. And, you really are getting the essence of the mineral of the water content, either from Dortmund or mimicked. And so you're going to get the style guidelines mentioned like a dry, flinty sharpness. If you're really getting the true, authentic, high in sulfite, carbonite, and chloride type of water. It finishes refreshing, and then that helps us fall right into mouthfeel.
Yeah, and I'll take mouthfeel. This is the thing about this is imagine a German lager that is really, really well balanced, but has medium to medium full body. I mean, that's also, to me, that's just very different from other beers. That's what makes this special and unique, is because it has such a body impact. The carbonation can also have quite an impact too. It should be about a medium carbonation, but this one has just this assertive prickle that isn't uncomfortable. It's very refreshing, but it's stimulating we're talking mouthfeel. It stimulates the feel of my mouth, which is kind of a genius statement on my part, but but I can feel it, and it's a stimulating effect that just kind of makes me want to take another bite, another sip. These can be a little bit stronger in alcohol. So if you do get a little bit of alcohol warmth, which I do out of this one, that is perfectly okay, but it shouldn't be hot. It shouldn't be spicy. It should never, ever, ever be harsh. But it's just, I can't explain or over video or audio, but this has got some body to it, which is going to be fun when we start talking about pairing with this thing. Let's talk about other styles. Since we're talking about how big a body this is, let's talk about the styles that would compare to.
Absolutely. And so German Helles export beer, again, part of the pale bitter European beer category, is not a Munich Helles. It's not one of the pale malty Euro lagers. There's a reason the word bitterness is in there. And that's, if you were tasting it next to a Munich Helles, that's one of the major differentiators, is the discerning bitterness and that dry, flinty bite. So style comparisons are often obviously with the Munich Helles, but a little bit higher gravity and stronger, as Jeremy said, and certainly more bitter than that Munich Helles. On top of that, it's got, comparison to it's less hop flavor centric and a little bit more body and residual sugar than a German Pils. So that's a good one to try it next to. And then, stronger, drier, but less hoppy than a Czech premium pale lager. Every single one of those styles that I just mentioned are super fun to all taste in a flight and then really start to get that discerning difference. You really want to, if you're going to lead in beer, certainly know how to articulate the difference between Czech premium pale lager and German Pilsner. And then you're branching out from there now to say the difference between Munich Helles and a German Pils, Munich Helles and a, and the Dortmunder German Helles export beer. Throw a Kolsch in there and start to see what you are aware of. So it's got a lot of similar styles, but there are discerning enough differentiators with the higher original gravity and the flinty, dry, sharp bitterness that should set it apart.
And I think that is excellent expert advice, because anyone who is trying to understand these beers in detail and go after some level of certification like advanced Cicerone or above, you have to grab these beers and taste them side by side to learn the differences, because it's going to be subtle. You're going to have a very finely tuned and trained palate to easily tell the difference between a Kolsch and a Dortmund and a Helles and a Czech premium pale. That's going to be a tricky thing. So that is excellent advice to do that. While you're going out to try and find some of these beers, it is a bit hard. I found one that is not on the commercial examples of the guidelines, but the Jahrhundert beer from Eyinger I found. And actually, I have an easier time finding this one. So I'm just going to say this is a good one to try. Other ones to look for, basically, here's the trick. If you see Dortmund or Dortmunder or even DAB in the label, there you go. That's it. Grab that, take it home, and taste it. We're looking at Chuckanut is one that is still on the commercial examples. Others, they've got the German name. So hopefully you have a good bottle shop nearby, but you need to ask them for a Dortmund specific beer.
Yeah, and Chuckanut's out of Washington, Will and Mari Kemper. If you're ready to do a pilgrimage in the U.S. to see what the U.S. classic emulation and ode to these styles are, these German styles, get to Chuckanut. That is, they continue to bag medals at the highest level of competition to showcase their prowess in this arena, including with this style.
And I'm glad you said that, because I don't know their beers personally, so or them personally. So they're on my list.
Only in their state of origin, as far as I know. So they're really hard. You have to go to the Mecca of Chuckanut to get them.
Perfect. Will do. But let's talk about some beer stats. I alluded earlier that this is very similar to Munich Helles, but you look at the stats and it's just a little bit bigger. Let's look at the stats.
Yeah. And when I memorize style guidelines and stats, it's really hard for my dyslexic brain. This to me is the style of fives. If you look at the original gravity, it's 1050 to 1058. There's 2 5s in there. And then final gravity, just flip it, 10008 to 1015. So that's really helpful for me to remember. And then original gravity can often help get you to the ABV. So again, here's our 5. It's 5% ABV to 6% ABV. That original gravity of 1050 to 1058 is basically 5% to 6% almost. So hopefully that's helpful. And then international bitterness units are 20 to 30. I'm going to call that medium level, not low, not high, but definitely in that medium range of 20 to 30 bitterness units. And then if you're going to remember anything for this wonderful style of German Helles export beer, you're going to remember the word gold. And gold means 5 SRM. So if you study the style guidelines and you say 4 to 6, they are correct. 4 to 6 is like, dark hay, dark straw to dark gold, right? Gold classically is 5 SRM. Look at Jeremy's glass if you're actually watching this on video. So 4 to 6 SRM for this style, or you could just remember another 5 right in the middle and add a digit on each side. What
a great way to remember this style. That's a great little hack into memorizing all these numbers, because I can't do that. I've got to look at the patterns. And so when I look at the patterns, I look at how the ABV is in the normal range, but in the upper end of the normal range from 5 to 6. If 4 to 6 is normal, this is on the upper end. So 5 to 6.
Yeah.
And a lot of German beers end up being right about 20 to 30. So it kind of falls in line with IBUs of like, other German beers, and you can go look at those yourself. But that's fantastic. So ideal glassware. Can we talk about ideal glassware?
Please do.
Because I have kind of a different version of a stemmed Pilsner glass that I'm drinking out of. Luckily, I'm in the midst of moving, so most of my glassware is packed, but I was able to pull this one out and use it. But having a Pilsner glass is really the best way to drink this, because you want to see that color. You want to see that clarity. You want to support that foam that really wants to persist. There's no more foam in my glass now, but last time I poured it was probably 10 minutes ago, and it's easily roused. You need a glass that will just make this experience so much nicer. I always think of it as like if you're going out on a date with your spouse or your significant other, it's like it's a different date if I put on a tank top and cargo shorts versus kind of getting dressed up. They're both fun dates, but it's a different kind of date. So when you put it in a fun glass, it's a different kind of beer.
Yep. And you made a great case when we were reviewing a similar beer style about the importance of that foot and the stem and how the hand doesn't warm up the glass too much.
Yep.
And I certainly see the value of that. And Jeremy holds it so eloquently, but yet doesn't look like a snob. So I'm impressed there already.
Here's snob mode with my pinky out, and then no snob mode with my pinky in. And
you're more stable there too. Your pinky out, you got one less digit to help you out, right?
Yeah. So how about beer pairing? We've got the glass for this. What would we pair? What would you pair with this?
And I mean, it is a exercise in lots of options with smaller nuances when you pair pale bitter Euro lagers and pale malty Euro lagers, right? The bitterness is just going to allow you to stand up a little bit more against foods that have some richness and some fat. On craftbeer.com, we've certainly recommended, Colby cheese, which is not an off-the-charts cheese, but it's also not like mozzarella. Baklava for dessert, I think, is a fabulous suggestion. You've got the essence of honey in some of these malt notes that really fall and bridge and echo with the graham cracker notes of Pilsner malt. And then samosas, right? And depending what's packed in the samosa, but the samosa is a traditional pocket dish, and it's also really about the encasement, right? The starch in a samosa. So that will fall into the low kiln malt flavor of that Pilsner malt. And the hops, it's not like when a chef needs herbs and spices and they're going to go to an IPA to get a lot of aromatic hops. These German noble hops have a light hand, so I'm not looking for the aroma hops to kind of help influence the food and act as a sauce or an herb on top of that food. To me, it's more about pairing with the malt and also not barreling over this beer because of that 5 to 6% alcohol. It's not a truly, dense, big beer. It is more refreshing. So you don't want to have something that's too rich, or it will kind of negate all the beautiful nuance that's going on in the glass.
And I love all of that. I think the only thing that I would add to that is because this is a bigger German lager, that I feel like I could get away with some matching in bigger intensities. I with this right off the bat, I'm thinking I want to eat diver scallops, seared diver scallops with this, or maybe lumpia from the Philippines, or fish and chips from Southern England, something like that, where it's big, but this can stand with it, and it can bridge with those malt flavors like you were talking about. The hops are present enough that they can add some flavor to that. But even like an Italian carbonara, creamy carbonara pasta dish would be fantastic, especially if there's bacon involved. But I think this would just be fantastic. But I think that you can do more with this than a typical lager.
Yeah, so it's a great style. Get to know it. I'll say, and kind of wrap it up, thanks for joining us for German Helles Export Beer, and seek them out. Harder to find, but findable, and totally worth your time.
Totally worth it.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia,
and me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.